Hare Krishna, and welcome to class 11 of the Nectar of Devotion. We're going to go through chapters 17 and 18 today, which is really exciting because our goal is chapter 19, which we'll finish next week. And then we'll review everything all the wonderful nectar that we've tasted. So we'll do that today, and we'll start with some kirtan.
Okay, so let's come into a comfortable seat. Me personally, I want to shift around a little bit, move a little bit, roll out my shoulders, open and close my mouth, release my jaw. Let's take a deep breath in, a clearing breath out together. Inhale, fill up. Exhale, let it go. So we land here together, shifting from whatever we were just doing, from the energy, whatever mode of material energy we were in today as we navigated our service, our work, our responsibilities in the world, and we gather here to put ourselves in front of transcendental sound. Right? Kirtan in its various forms. We'll chant together now, and we'll also be speaking about Krishna, also Kirtan, in our Shastra class. So we'll begin with our opening prayers. Invocation, this celebration, this offering of gratitude, of respect, reverence, with humility and sincerity and devotion to all of our teachers, the disciplic succession, the Pancha Tattva, all the devotees gathered here today, into the magic potency of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Deep breath in. Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Vanchakopatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubheva cha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Nice and loud. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Shastra Study Group Key. Hari Hari Bol.
Om Jnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana-shalakaya Chakshur-unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Gaura Premanande Haribo Hare Krishna. All right. So last week we talked about descriptions of devotional service. We talked about the anartha nivritti, purification of the heart, and how it is that when one is sufficiently purified, one becomes naturally inclined to hear about Krishna in particular ways, and one's particular mood of devotion becomes manifest and blossoms and develops more and more. Let's get some reflections on any of that. And we our kind of like homework was reflecting on anartha nivritti and what that means to you, letting go of things that are barriers that are useless. Anartha nivritti literally means the eradication, letting go of things that are useless, the obstacles. So let's get any reflections on that, any comments, get the ball rolling. How was that for you?
Still having a lot of anarthas.
Still having a lot of anarthas.
And that's okay. And having an awareness that they're there and a sincere desire to be in the purificatory. How do you do that?
Purificatory.
Purificatory. It sounds strange, but the purificatory process of bhakti, and that it's 50% endeavor and 50% mercy, and I don't have to do it all, but having that sincere commitment and desire to continuously have my anarthas rise to the surface so that I can have a more humble, pure process of devotional service is both encouraging and frustrating at the same time. And I know that I'm in the process and I'm in the practice.
Jai, thank you. And it's a positive process, meaning our fundamental goal isn't anartha nivritti. That's a supplement. It helps us because our fundamental goal is Krishna. And, if we're getting in our own way, and these things are getting in our way, then that's an obstacle to Krishna. But the goal is Krishna, which means that a positive process means that we chant his names. We don't sit around chanting our anarthas. We don't list those things. We're going to list some qualities today, qualities of persons at the level of Bhava. We got a lot of beautiful lists in Bhakti. We got lists of qualities, lists of avatars. We have different pastimes, different things that we want to like enunciate and enumerate, and we don't really do that with our anarthas. It's like we work on them, but our main thing is Krishna. And even when it comes to anarthas, it's like, okay, so I see that's there, Krishna, I'm like naming it, you know it, I know it. I want this to go away. I want this to get purified so I can serve you better. And please help me, show me what I can do. And the process remains the same. Keep hearing and chanting. The more, the better. Because that's what it's all about. Good. More reflections or comments?
Yeah, something I was experiencing even on my way over to deliver prashad for Ekadasi, so transcendental. And also I'm feeling like I feel like upset about material things, like I am feeling angry today or some frustration. And like I guess to be both. Like I was having those just human emotions, while also in the passenger seat is a box full of prashad for tomorrow. And just reminding myself of it can be both for now. And what if everything I'm experiencing it's Krishna's hand in some way.
Hmm.
So instead of identifying identifying with it, like this is Krishna calling my attention, or something's here. And then it's just like being able to hold both, but like choosing to identify with the devotee serving prasad while also having my experience in the driver's seat of like certain things aren't feeling that great. But then, you know, certain verses come to mind, or even just certain like things are getting stuck with me now, like in the good way, that actually is helping me in the moment.
Yeah, Ishopanishad says Vidyang Chavidang Chayas Tadvedo Payang Saha, that you should experience knowledge and nation side by side. And you will, as long as you have a spiritual practice. Because the other stuff is going to automatically be there. There's always going to be the material stuff. You don't have to try for that. We're already in that. If we've signed up for it, you know, we're going to get a certain amount of things. Good, bad, all of it. But if you have a spiritual practice, gives you a connection to a spiritual experience, you can experience a little bit of yourself as a unit of consciousness beyond all these circumstances. You can experience Krishna just even a little bit with verses, with Mahamantra, Kirtan, association, prasadam, service, the deities, any or all these things. Then you get those two things side by side. So that's what I'm hearing you describe is like, I have dual citizenship. I got one foot in the spiritual world and one foot in the material world. And that's true. We do. Bhaktivinoda Thakur said so. We have our trying to remember the Sanskrit for it, Paramarthika and our Vyavaharika. We have our spiritual and our material, and that's where we're at. But we get to have that side-by-side comparison because we're choosing to engage in our spiritual practice. So that's why it's so important to have a core practice every day. It gives you a reference point. With no reference point, like all the stuff that comes and goes becomes incredibly important. It becomes everything. It's unbelievably magnified because there's no context anymore. So when you have that context point, it's like, yeah, I'm not going to like deny that that's happening. I'm not going to lie to myself or spiritually bypass it's happening. And I got to own my experience around it. And I'm also distributing prasadam. How cool is that? You know, or whatever one's service may be. Yeah.
What was the verse that you led with?
Instruction.
Yeah, that's from the Ishopanishad. I'll find the number for you. We studied Ishopanishad a little while ago. And it's great. Just saying. It's really great.
It's nice to have them, you know, coming into the
Ishopanishad.
Yeah.
Okay. It is Ishopanishad, verse 11. Check that out. I can give you the link. Send the link in the chat and also in the chat. The online chat and the WhatsApp chat.
I'll put it in the WhatsApp.
Okay, good. Any more comments or reflections or questions? On another, yeah, please.
Oh, I was just catching up on the recording and I was thinking how much easier it is to release and let go of the anartas because of all the things that you had said before about bhakti being a positive process and the story you told about the spiritual seeker who felt very overwhelmed. And I think you said Lord Chaitanya said, just chant Hare Krishna, and just by doing simple things like that, it gets easier. And then you shared the verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam, because Eileen had the question about going to concerts, and
right, Canto 11 classic.
It was a great verse, and it's like, you know that these obstacles are going to come. You can't resist them. We can't. I can't always not be with friends who are not devotees, but just with this different lens that I see things through, I can kind of exist and put things into place and just not be so overwhelmed by being in either place.
Great. Great. Thank you. Yeah, and what we're hearing in these chapters are these descriptions of devotees realizing their eternal relationship with Krishna. And, you know, today we're going to hear about Bhava-Bhakti, devotional service in ecstasy. You know, bhakti, the level of ecstatic love. This is meant to be inspiring because this is what the payoff is for anartha nivritti. This is what the difference is between material self-help and spiritual self-help. Material self-help is like, get over your problems so I guess you can have like a more peaceful life. They never really say what the goal is. I guess, you know, it's nice to not have those problems, but that's really all it is. for the spiritual self-help is like, you get rid of all that material stuff so you can actually experience Bhava-Bhakti, Prema Bhakti. You can actually be completely in love with Krishna and have this glorious eternal relationship. That's the payoff. That's the goal. That's our inspiration. So when we're reading these things and hearing these things today and throughout our relationship with Shastra, this is what we want to keep in front of us, you know? This is why Anartha Nivritti is useful. This is why the process has so much merit to it, because it's not just a self-help course. It's pure love for Krishna, and we get to hear about how wonderful that is, even before we're there. And when you hear about it, it's not different than actually being there. You actually get to some degree, actually get to be there by hearing attentively, by hearing with faith. Thank you.
Can say a little bit.
Yeah, Amy wants to say something.
We keep saying material and spiritual, and really material, all the material things are really spiritual too, because they're created by Krishna.
Correct.
So we're all really in a spiritual place too.
That's right. Yeah, because there's what makes something material or spiritual is how it's used, not its constitution in and of itself. Because it's constitutionally everything comes from Krishna. There's nothing that doesn't come from Krishna. And what's becoming spiritual isn't exactly the thing, it's our relationship to the thing. It's ourself, it's our consciousness. And as our consciousness gets Krishna conscious, then the body we're using, the voice we're using, our money, the world, this object, that relationship becomes proportionally spiritual because of our own application, putting it in the right place. It's already, actually from Krishna's point of view, everything's spiritual. It's from our point of view that we have this question of what's material or what's spiritual. How do I apply myself? Yeah. But at the practical level, that distinction is useful, because then we get to see, like, yeah, for example, you know, depending on our qualification, a very advanced devotee may walk into like an opium den and share Krishna consciousness there, you know, or like a brothel. And a less advanced devotee will be like, I can't handle that environment, you know, because that's just a level of the modes of nature that I'm not qualified to experience Krishna through. So that distinction is there as long as we're at the level of practice. But everything's Krishna's property. So in a way, they're not different, but we have to know our qualification. Thank you. All right, let's get into it. Chapter 16?
17.
Chapter 17.
Ecstatic love.
Ecstatic love. Bhava. Bhava means ecstatic love. So there's a verse in this regard that defines ecstatic love. It's Chaitanya Charitamrita. I'll send the verse here. Madhya Lila, chapter 23, verse 5. It's in the, oops. Yeah. The verse itself is Shuddha Sattva Visheshatma Prema Suryangsha Samyabhak Ruchibhischitma Srnya Kritasa Bhava Uchite. When devotional service is executed on the transcendental platform of pure goodness, it is like a sun ray of love for Krishna. At such a time, devotional service causes the heart to be softened by various tastes, and one is then situated in bhava, emotion. So pure goodness, Shuddha Sattva. So we've learned about the modes of material nature. For example, in the Bhagavad Gita, there's a lot about the modes of material nature in chapter 14. That's really what that whole chapter is about. And it's really practical stuff, you know. We can understand the world is in these different modalities, and the highest of the material modes is Sattva, goodness. Shuddha Sattva is actually different, because as that chapter in Bhagavad Gita points out, every material condition, every kind of body, every time of day, every human event, all these things are a mixture of the modes. And the mixture is always there. All three of the modes of nature are always there in any material configuration. One is dominant, then that dominance is moving, right? Just like you can't freeze time at 4:15 a.m. in the morning and like have that energy of like, you know, the Brahma Muhurta go all day. It's always shifting. That's what the material world is. It's the place of coming into being and coming out of being, shifting and transformation. So whatever's in goodness here is temporary and is mixed. right? Shuddha Sattva means pure goodness. Shuddha Sattva means that goodness that is not mixed, right? And it's spiritual because it's eternal. Everything else in this material world, no matter how sattvic it may be, is temporary. So what we're talking about here is the descent of spiritual energy into the heart. And Shuddha Sattva, pure goodness, is composed of two different Shaktis, primarily. It's that the Samvit Shakti and the Hladini Shakti. Samvit means spiritual knowledge. Hladini means spiritual emotion, spiritual bliss. It's described, these two energies, they nourish the devotee. By knowing Krishna and by having feeling for Krishna. This is something we cannot evoke through any combination of material circumstances. This is actually descending. And I think it's important at this point to compare spiritual knowledge or happiness and material knowledge and happiness. Because in the material world, there's some knowledge, right? We know things. We can have an experience of understanding. And there's some joy and some pleasure, right? And that's there in the 14th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. It's described that sattva guna, the mode of goodness, sukha sangena bhatnati jnana sangena chanaka. Oh, Arjuna, the manifestation of the mode of goodness is that there's one is bound to the experience of knowledge and of happiness. But there's that word bound. It's a material version of happiness. It's material knowledge. And therefore one is bound to the material world. But they're at a higher level than one who is at the level of rajas, passion, or tamas, ignorance. But material knowledge is knowledge about that which is temporary, right?
Mhm.
Prabhupada calls it mundane knowledge, material knowledge, right? So if we want to understand about the composition of the material world, we want to understand about different bodies, different particles, subatomic particles. We want to understand about human psychology, human interactions, political, sociological, familial, romantic, what have you. This is all material knowledge. There's gyan involved in this. There's a certain amount of understanding. So when the understanding is aimed at that which is temporary and which is within the material energy, this is a kind of material knowledge. And similarly, there is material emotion. All the emotions that we're hearing about in the spiritual context in this Nectar Devotion book are the pure source of all material emotions. And everyone here experiences material emotions. Everyone here is a sentient being, from the Latin sentire, to feel. Everyone feels, especially as humans. Even non-humans, they feel to one extent or another, right? You can see how mammals feel. Anyone have a pet? Even reptiles, a little less sentient, but they're sentient. Plants are sentient. All living entities are sentient, especially humans, very sensitive. We feel things, but all of our feelings in the material context are in relationship to the coming and going of this circumstance or that circumstance. This looks like it's good for me, I feel happy. This looks like it's bad for me, I feel bad, feel sad or angry, or whatever, different kinds of things. But they're real experiences, right? As Julie was pointing out, we have our spiritual and our material side by side. So it's important to compare these two. There is spiritual emotion and there's material emotion. Material emotion we know, and it's characterized by coming and going. It's characterized by temporariness, temporality. And it's characterized by being in a relationship to some material circumstance. That which is spiritual is not in relationship to any circumstance. It's always true, right? So we can have some feeling for Krishna. If we have some feeling for Krishna, we'll have feeling for Krishna when it's cold out. In 6 months, we'll have feeling for Krishna when it's hot out. Have feeling when we're young and healthy. Have feeling if we're old and unhealthy, right? Meaning the body. Have feeling if we're alone, if we're together, if we're in a politically expedient or wonderful situation, or if we're in the middle of a violent revolution. There is no interruption to that feeling, and there's no interruption to that knowledge. One can actually experience one's relationship with Krishna. One can experience the truth of his existence, of our own existence in the light of knowing him. That's true in all circumstances. Right? So this is the difference between spiritual knowledge, spiritual emotion and material knowledge, material emotion. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Let's get some reflection or comments or questions about that. There's a lot in that actually. Does anybody have any questions about spiritual emotion, spiritual understanding, or material emotion, material understanding? Or if they feel comfortable about it, they want to reflect back what they heard. Samantha.
Wow. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hare Bol, Hare Krishna. I have questions about all three of those things, but that's not what I was going to talk about. You just reminded me, you know, with the Latin base of the, you know, sentience and to feel, sentire. In Italian, it's the same, you know, it's the same thing, but you know, it's to hear and to feel. And it's kind of interesting that it's just kind of lumped together like that. You know, the senses are like, you know, it's kind of like a little arbitrary grouping, and it kind of makes me, it just popped into my head, just made me think about, you know, how powerful the senses are, whether or not it's feeling or hearing or whatever sensuality there is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's weird that there's one verb for both.
Yeah, because we're receivers. Because we can receive, that's evidence of our being sentient. Yeah. I'd love to hear your questions, though. That's what we're here for. So if you have any question, you said you had a couple questions. Please air them.
I quickly muted myself. What was the first thing you said? If anybody has any questions on.
I was saying spiritual emotion or spiritual knowledge and material emotion, material knowledge, the differences, the similarities, how to understand the differences. Or if you feel like you received that clearly and you want to just reflect it back, what you heard, that would also be helpful.
I have a comment or question, but I
Yeah.
don't know if I can quite articulate it, because I'm kind of making sense of it in my head, but. So spiritual emotion is eternal and not in relationship to material circumstances. So I could be in a kirtan or sitting here or in wherever in India and having an amazing experience and feel a spiritual emotion. That's different than what I have felt in material circumstances,
Okay.
but then it goes away.
All right.
Right, and then I'm not always feeling it, so the distinction between it's an eternal emotion and the knowledge is eternal, like it's absolute truth. And this emotion is something that will continue and always will be, but doesn't mean I will always feel it.
Not right away necessarily. Prabhupada talks about that in this chapter.
So it is eternal, even though it can feel temporary while I'm in this material encasing.
Yeah, so Srila Prabhupada writes in this chapter about different symptoms of ecstasy. They're visible in the shivering of the body and shedding of tears, because that's emotion at a very high pitch. After the outward appearance of these ecstatic symptoms, they stay within the mind. And continuation of the ecstasy is called samadhi. In the next chapter, he talks about how even persons who are not at the level of bhava, who are quite new, can experience, for a couple of different reasons, they can experience a reflection of spiritual emotion temporarily. And basically it has to do with association. By association of more advanced devotees, one can actually experience something above their own adhikar, their own qualification or level. Like, we may not be over here, but if someone else is over here, we can experience something, even temporarily. And that kind of thing may not persist, but what can persist is regularly having some kind of experience and then feeling that is actually categorically different than all the other kinds of experiences I'm having. And you know it when you're there, right? You know when you're in a good kirtan and you're tasting the holy name to some degree, that there's a certain quality to that. And so it is eternal, because one comes more and more to the point of experiencing an unbroken connection with Krishna. That's possible to have, right? You don't have to be in a kirtan to have a ecstatic feeling for Krishna and transcendental knowledge of Krishna.
So is it safe to say that getting to have a little taste of that, if you will, is just mercy
Yes.
from Krishna, and also gives a little like nugget in some way of like this is possible to feel, or like you know, it gives even more impetus to continue to
Yeah, and if you
practice.
absolutely, and if you look at that kind of experience, again, like you're in a kirtan, you feel something. I know a lot of devotees who comment that the best kirtans for them persist outside when the kirtan ends. They leave the room, they leave the sangha, the instruments are put down, they stop chanting, and their mind is just still going, and they're still feeling joy. They're still feeling that ecstasy, and even for hours, right? And these are not necessarily devotees who are at the level of Bhava-Bhakti. These are just like, medium, intermediate, beginner devotees. It's not unusual. I took my dad to a Sunday feast, and he was like, hours later, like, I still hear the Maha Mantra. I still hear Krishna's name. I feel really happy still. And so, and then when it's gone, our being in touch with that is not so much there. Then we experience the material emotions, and we can see that, they're categorically different. It doesn't have the same quality to it. The material happiness doesn't provide full freedom from suffering, doesn't actually satisfy in the same way when the spiritual does. So there's that constant side-by-side experience until we're getting more constant, more steady. Okay. Any more questions on spiritual emotion and knowledge? Spiritual emotion knowledge? Aaron, please go ahead.
Sorry, I'm not on camera. I'm just in a spot where I can't be, but I just want to clarify if I heard correctly. When we are in a situation where maybe we get that taste, did I hear you say that is really coming from the association that we're having with other devotees that may be in a more advanced spiritual place? Did I hear that right?
That's right. Srila Prabhupada describes it in the next chapter, that the shadow reflection of higher spiritual emotion can be there, so can find it for you. Yeah. Shadow attachment and para attachment. Sometimes it is found that a person actually attached to material enjoyment or salvation has the good fortune to associate with pure devotees while they are engaged in chanting the holy name of the Lord. By the good grace of the Lord, one may also cooperate in joining the chanting. At that time, simply by the association of such pure devotees, the moon-like rays from their hearts reflect on them. And by the influence of the pure devotees, they may show some likeness of attachment caused by inquisitiveness, but this is very flickering. And if by the manifestation of such shadow attachment one feels the disappearance of all material pangs, then it is called para attachment. That's for like really beginners. As one takes to steady practice, one can have this very regularly. They become even more qualified. Like adao shraddha to sadhu sangha. First, you have some faith, then you start associating, then you get your own daily practice. And the daily practice means you get daily experience. But the daily practice came from devotees. So in that way, you can also say, like, when you're chanting your japa, if you have like a really nice experience when you're chanting your japa, it's like that's also a manifestation of mercy from the devotees. But the point is, even a neophyte, even like a really totally new person can experience something very high temporarily. And Prabhupada and Rupa Goswami pointing out, that's just by being next to, within earshot of an advanced devotee. Make sense?
Yeah, thank you. It just gives me a new lens to think back on some, moments in India.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, moving on. Well, unless there was someone really wanted to add or ask or
Right.
contribute.
I wanted to ask something.
Yes.
Or think about something or ponder something. I was thinking about Anartha Nivritti, and I was thinking about thinking about material emotions versus spiritual emotion, and thinking about how sometimes I'm curious about how can our material emotions be misconstrued as spiritual emotions, and like really thinking about how what are we carrying into that process, because I think that it's really subtle. from part of like from my own personal realizations of like my spiritual experience, and just kind of wondering about maybe what are some of your insights or take on that? Like, how are we carrying in some of our own personal conditioning into our spiritual experiences and knowing the difference between spiritual emotion versus material emotions?
Yeah. Well, this is a perennial thing because in every tradition, including our own, there is the tendency to take that which is spiritual and that which is material and mix them, either unconsciously because of ignorance or because of some ill intent, some desire to kind of like cut a corner, take that which is very difficult and rare and precious and just make it really cheap, or to exploit or to show off to other people. This is possible because of human nature, right? Or even just, yeah, like I said, because of simple ignorance, one can misunderstand. The word for that in our tradition is sahajya, which means to take something as being very cheap, right? And the solution to that kind of tendency is to understand that this is a spiritual process that has to do with spiritual emotion, but that it is actually defined and presented through Shastra. It is both emotional, subjective, and an intellectually rigorous experience, meaning it can be, and it has been, described what it is and what it isn't. Reading Nectar of Devotion, hearing from pure devotees, having our own spiritual teachers, these are the ways which we can actually use to triangulate, to see, am I experiencing a spiritual emotion? Is this appropriate? That's a question I've asked my own guru. I had this experience. What does this mean? Right? That is a completely bona fide question to ask, because as you're pointing out, we may not understand the difference. Because, even in the material context, we have more or less pleasant experiences. Like for somebody who's, I don't know, when they go to Disneyland for their birthday when they're 7 years old, that may feel like they're on top of the world. And this is like, that's their high water mark. They can think that's spiritual. So everybody has some different kind of context. And in the absence of hearing about, for example, the metric that spiritual emotion is independent of a material context, right? It has nothing to do with the material body. If we don't understand that, right? If we don't apply that knowledge, then we can misunderstand, like, oh, okay, I had a really nice meal, so I must be having like a spiritual experience because I feel full, right? That's like spirituality for the lower animals. They experience Krishna through whatever they eat. That's what they're capable of. It's not really actually technically spiritual though. It's not a conscious, anyway, not to, do you see what I'm saying? So yeah, Shastra, Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, we have to triangulate. And it's possible to do that. And the fundamental answer, I think, is that, but also having your own spiritual experience, which you can have by taking the primary practices of bhakti very seriously. If we try to chant Hare Krishna sincerely, we will have a spiritual experience. It's just the way that Krishna has chosen to manifest in such a wonderful way. If we associate with devotees, we will have spiritual experiences, especially if we're trying to be of service, if we're trying to receive sound vibration of what they're saying, the Shastra. If we take to these primary practices, then we're giving ourselves the best chance to actually have that impression in the heart. And the more you have that impression, the more you have a different context than, oh, had a nice meal. Oh, I went to Disneyland. I won the lottery. When you have those repeated impressions of spiritual reality from these primary things, chanting Hare Krishna, hearing Shastra, going to a holy place, serving the deity, and associating with devotees, then you start to have that side-by-side comparison so often, you can start to develop your own sense from your own experience. So there's both the answer of you just know it because of internal experience in comparison with other kinds of experience, and you also confirm it through authority. Both are true.
Can you give an example, like I just said, simple, tangible example of maybe it's joy, or I don't know, what is like of a material emotion opposed to a spiritual emotion.
Yeah, material emotion, I find $20 in my pocket. Awesome. Great.
Woohoo!
Woo. Or I lose $20. It's an emotion.
Mhm.
Spiritual emotion is the emotion you have when you put that $20, you give it to some devotional cause. You use it to buy some Bhagavad Gitas and you donate it. Or you use it to buy some bhoga, some food products, and offer it to Krishna and honor that prasad and distribute it. That feeling you have when you do that is spiritual, right? Especially to the degree that you realize what you're doing and you're doing it with strong intention. That's an example.
That could be helpful for the.
Yeah.
Could you, I mean, the line might be blurred, but when we're like going through like a churning like of that anartha vritti, is that the word? Could that be considered a spiritual experience because we're like flushing and thrashing out through that anartha vritti?
To the extent that you're aware that Krishna is involved in it, to the extent that you see it as instrumental in becoming more and more purified for his service, to the extent that you're asking for his help and you see his hand, like you said, like I'm going through this stuff, but I trust that Krishna's hand is in it. That's how devotees think. That's a devotional realization. Very advanced devotees confirm that. It's all happening as part of Krishna's plan for me. So to the extent that's so, and we see that Krishna is involved, it is a spiritual experience for us.
And at the same time, it's like, and that will change. You know, it's like, the more that gets worked through, I would like to think it's like, it comes up less and less.
Right.
So in that way, it's like, you know, it is material, it is like fleeting, we are detaching from that, and also connected to, you know, a higher taste or a higher experience.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that it's not about the thing that's happening. That's not what the devotee is focusing on. They're focusing on how that's happening for the reason of Krishna. That realization makes what they're going through spiritual, not the thing itself, you know?
Material emotions. However, you can navigate it through a spiritual lens, and therefore it's a spiritual experience.
Right. Okay,
Okay.
moving on. So the chapter of the definition of bhava is at that time, the devotional service causes the heart to be softened by various tastes. There's 3 different basic aspirations under this category. 1 is the desire to achieve Krishna. 2 is the desire to please Krishna by various services. And 3 is the desire to be close at heart with Krishna, or to never forget him, to remember him. These are the kinds of aspirations that arise in the heart as one advances and comes to the level of bhava. They have a strong desire to please Krishna, they want to achieve him, and they want to be close with him. Also in this chapter, Prabhupada points out that this stage of bhava is possible to be attained in 2 different ways. One is by association, constant association, and one is by special mercy. Srila Prabhupada compares it to going to school, getting a degree, and he says sometimes it is found that a person who never attended school or college may be recognized as a great scholar, or an honorary degree may be offered to them. But this does not mean that one should avoid school and expect to automatically receive an honorary degree. Similarly, one should devoutly execute the regulative principles of devotional service and at the same time hope for Krishna's favor or for his devotees' favor, right? We don't just like you wouldn't consider going to school if you're like just sitting around the couch and waiting for someone to knock on your door and give you an honorary degree. It can happen, you know. Similarly, we have to apply ourselves. And it's also possible that Krishna can just wave his wand, give us, the devotee can glance at us. There can be some special mercy. That can happen. And as an example of devotional advancement by association, Srila Prabhupada refers to Narada Muni's story of how he was a young boy. In Bhagavatam Canto 1, Chapter 5. We've been reading that on Fridays in the Friday morning Bhagavatam class, Narada Muni associated with devotees and became very advanced by them, by their association. That's an example of becoming situated in bhava by association. And by the service that the devotees gave him, he continued to practice. He became steady in that ecstasy. Moving into chapter 18. The character of one in ecstatic love. So here we have the symptoms of bhava, right? Just like I could say to you, oh, I'm very advanced. I'm a very advanced devotee. Actually, just before class started, I was actually in my mind and heart dancing with Krishna in the groves of Vrindavan. And can you prove that that's true? No. Can you prove it's not true? No. It's not verifiable. And so this also speaks to Mel's question about identifying spiritual emotion. Every single one of the symptoms of bhava is verifiable. There is some degree of that you can actually, it manifests externally and you can see it. These aren't symptoms like one is experiencing dancing with Krishna in their heart, which one can do at a very high level of bhakti. No. Particularly, I want to quote Madhvacharya, one of our predecessor acharyas, who says in his purport to a verse in the 11th canto, every verse that I quote is from the 11th canto, it seems. This verse is a verse that Mahaprabhu himself quoted. The verse says, Evang Prita Swapriya Nama Kirtiya. When one becomes advanced in chanting Krishna's name, one becomes attached to a particular name of Krishna and manifests spiritual emotions. And at that time, they don't care about external judgment or the world. They may cry, they may do this or that, they may experience some devotional ecstasy that manifests externally. In his purport to that verse, Madhvacharya says, not every advanced devotee at the stage of bhava or higher, prema, will show all these external symptoms. They may restrain themselves. They may not actually show them. But every one of them has two symptoms that you can always see. And they cannot hold it back. And these are very verifiable. One is, everything that comes from their mouth is for the betterment of others. It's merciful. Their words are all good for everybody, always. And the other one is steadiness. So these symptoms of bhava, they're like that. There's a nice verse actually in the Chaitanya Charitamrita and another verse in the source text in Nectar Devotion, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, listing these symptoms. There's 9 of them. And we're going to go over them. The first one is kshantir. Kshantir means reserved or perseverant. Prabhupada puts it number 2 in the list, so we'll do that number 2. Number 1 is when Sanskrit it's called avyartha kalatvam. Always anxious to use all their time. They don't want to waste even a second, right? That manifests and they want to be engaged in service all the time. If they have a free moment, they fill it up with Krishna's service, which is entirely possible to do. That's one of the things about spiritual experience, because it's eternal, because Krishna is always available, it is always possible for us to engage in devotional service. Someone can say, well, like, I can chant sometimes, but I can't chant when I'm brushing my teeth. Well, yeah, you can. Chant in your mind. There's always a way to engage in service. So
We started doing that. It's so helpful.
you started doing that?
When I brush my teeth.
Yeah.
Because before I'd have morning anxious thoughts and I just do that. It's changed everything.
There it is. Yeah, devotees at the level of practice, one thing they do is they try to fill the gaps. Even if they don't have a natural taste to do that, at Bhava-Bhakti, you just want to fill the gaps.
No, I don't, but like this
does
help.
So at the level of practice, like, this is good for me.
Yeah.
I'm going to crank on the kirtan right now while I brush my teeth. Every brahmachari ashram I've ever been to in the world is like that. You wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and they're all turning their kirtan on their phones while they brush their teeth and take a shower. Because you don't want space out time. You don't want to like get in your head and think about the dream you just had. It's like, no, Krishna, just Krishna. So advanced devotees, Prabhupada says they don't want to be idle. And this is a very practical thing. Prabhupada writes, an unalloyed devotee who has developed ecstatic love for Krishna is always engaging their words and reciting prayers. Within their mind, they're always thinking of Krishna. With their body, they're always either offering obeisances by bowing down or engaging in some other service. During these ecstatic activities, they sometimes shed tears. In this way, their whole life is engaged in the service of the Lord with not a moment wasted on any other engagement. You can tell you've had a good session of japa when you feel motivated to do service. You can tell you're in Krishna consciousness when you do not want to space out. You're like, you want to stay in Krishna consciousness. You want to hear more kirtan. Like if you have a good reading session, you get to the end of it, you're like, oh, do we have to stop? Tomorrow we're going to read Bhagavad Gita. And when we start, our mind is going to be like, oh man, do we have to? And at the end, we're going to be like, okay, got to stop. And the mind is going to be like, oh man, do we have to? Because we're going to become more Krishna conscious by the end than we were at the beginning. We're not going to want to stop. And if I'm wrong, you can tell me tomorrow. But that's an example of understanding that we're having a spiritual emotion. We don't want to stop the service. You don't have to. You can continue it. So the more advanced the devotee is, the more they're expert in finding ways of always being engaged. Make sense? Next one, perseverance or patience, means that a person is undisturbed even in the presence of various causes of disturbance. Maharaj Parikshit is given as an example. Maharaj Parikshit was cursed to die in 7 days. Didn't care. Just decided, that's okay. I just want to focus on Krishna. And he was undisturbed in his mind. He just heard very patiently from Shukadeva Goswami about Krishna and about what his duty was and how he could be Krishna conscious. He was completely undisturbed. So we're having these material experiences, we're having these spiritual experiences. The more advanced we are, the less we're disturbed by the material experiences, right? We can see them. Just like, let's say you're with a child and the child is having an experience. You can see the experience the child is having without identifying with it, right? You know, let's say they have something that's like a really big deal for them. They lose their favorite, I don't know, toy. And you can feel for them. And at the same time, in our lives, we've lost hundreds of things like that. We know you will get over it. But for them, it's the biggest thing in the universe. And you're with them and you see how they're experiencing it, but you don't experience it the same way. You just get it, but you have your own experience, you know? Similarly, we can actually have such standing in our spiritual relationship with Krishna that the bank forecloses and, you know, or we lose all our money. There's like a massive thing, or you know, the government topples and there's a revolution, and we're like, okay, I'm not gonna. That's not good, but I got this, right? What to speak of our day-to-day things, we can actually ride that and not be shaken. This is a symptom of advancement. It's possible to have that. So to the degree that we are shaken, to that degree we're identifying with the material still. It's okay. Keep going with your practice. But understand that this is one thing we can look forward to. And when you're looking at advanced devotees and you see that they're like so steady, they're always there. Nothing can stop them, even when they're ill, right? They're just like always hearing and chanting, always thinking about Krishna. They're not pushed around by the comings and goings. They don't give in to lamentation. They don't become falsely jubilant when some material thing goes their way. That's a symptom of advancement. You can't just fake that. If that's there over long stretches of time, that's a significant and verifiable symptom that they're advanced. Kshantir avirta kalatam, manashunyata, pridelessness. Manashunyata, being devoid of pride.
What was that? Which one's that?
Manashunyata, pridelessness.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's not the next one. You were
It's
just
the next one.
saying.
Yeah, number 3.
Okay.
There's an expression, even in this age, even a pauper is proud of their penny, right? No matter how little you have, when you're in material consciousness, you're very proud of what you have. You consider yourself to be excellent because of it, and you have some ego around it, some false ego. The more advanced one becomes, the more insignificant they consider themselves to be. They don't think that they're bad, or they don't sit around focusing on how they have so many bad faults. They just don't think about themselves. They're so busy thinking about Krishna. If someone came to them and said, "You're such an amazing person," they'd be like, Really, I don't see it. I just see how wonderful my gurus are to give me so much mercy. I see Krishna. He's great. Me, I don't know. I don't really do that much. And that's also very hard to fake. You can have that, you can kind of like have that for a little bit, and you can also fake it for a little bit. But if you really watch someone for a long time, they can't fake it forever. They're always going to take some credit, and they're always going to be hankering for more credit if they're at the material platform. And if they're not, they're really just satisfied with their relationship with Krishna. They don't consider themselves special. They don't consider themselves the source of their own accomplishments. That's a very high thing. Again, verifiable. Another one is number 4, Ashabanta, great hope, great conviction for Krishna's mercy. Ashabanta, Prabhupada says, means to continue to think, quote, because I'm trying my best to follow the principles of devotional service, the routine principles, I am sure that I will go back to Godhead, back to home. So here's a very beautiful prayer by Rupa Goswami himself, the author of this book. He says, and this prayer demonstrates this Ashabanta, he says, I have no love for Krishna, nor for the causes of developing love for Krishna, namely hearing and chanting. And in the process of bhakti yoga, by which one is always thinking of Krishna and fixing his lotus feet in the heart, is also lacking in me. As far as philosophical knowledge or pious works are concerned, I don't see any opportunity for me to execute such activities. Above all, I'm not even born of a good family. Therefore, I must simply pray to you, Krishna, maintainer and beloved of the gopis, Gopi Jana Vallabha. I simply wish and hope that some way or other I may be able to approach your lotus feet. The idea is that even in the face of whatever disqualifications we may have, it's actually a spiritual, it's a symptom of spiritual advancement to be always convinced that Krishna is somehow or other going to make up for it. He is potent enough. That's why we see when we're still at the level of practice, we can get stuck on like, oh man, this sucks. Why do I have to why am I always stopping and starting? Why is it 2 steps forward, 1 step back? That feeling of resignation, lamentation, that's absent in the advanced devotee. Even they see how small they are, but still they're so convinced, they're so sure of Krishna's mercy. It's been demonstrated to them over and over again. He will come through. He'll do it again. So they have that firm faith, firm conviction, which is wonderful, because then when something happens, even if you screw up, you're like, you don't have to get lost. You don't have to waste time and oh, can I even do this? Am I a fraud? Will I ever get there? None of that. It's like, you're just like, okay, all right, but Krishna's I know you got this, Krishna. I know you'll help me out. That's the devotional realization you can have at this level, bhava.
Krishna carries what we lack.
Yeah, he carries what we lack and preserves what we have. And that verse, 922 from Bhagavad Gita, Ananishchintayantam, Ananishchintayantam Mam, 922, our acharyas explain is Krishna's relating to the advanced devotee. That is Krishna relating to the Bhava-Bhakti and higher. For them, he truly carries what they lack and preserves what they have. And they're realizing that deeply. Because they're Ananyas Chintayantamam, they're completely, always dedicated to him, thinking about him. Good reference.
Hey, Prabhu, did we skip over he is always detached from all material attraction, number 3?
Did we? Yeah, we did. I missed that. Thank you.
Yeah.
That would have been a loss. Viraktir. Viraktir means detachment.
Detachment.
The senses are always desiring sense enjoyment. When a devotee develops transcendental love for Krishna, their senses are no longer attracted by material desires. This state of mind is called detachment. The example of King Bharata is given in the 5th canto of Bhagavatam. Bharata Maharaj was very advanced. He was in the level of bhava. And although he was an emperor, which meant he had, really, of everyone on the planet at the time, he had the actual highest level of opulence, right? We see how hard people fight for power and opulence and rulership and authority. He had it at the highest level. And at the highest level, when he had finished his time as a king, he decided to renounce and go to the forest and just think about Krishna and run out the clock and go back to Godhead. And when he did that, he had beautiful wives, because at that time you could actually be qualified enough to give shelter to more than one wife. He had the most beautiful women. He had all the opulence. He had the kingdom. He had the authority. He was the man. Capital T, capital M. Left it all behind. The Bhagavatam says, and this is a little graphic, bear with me. He left it behind just like someone leaves behind stool after they've passed. You go to the bathroom, you don't turn around and look at it. You just do your business and go. He was not at all attached to any of that. He's like, that time in my life is gone. I really cannot wait to go back to Godhead. Done. Viraktir. That's an example of detachment. So Prabhupada points out this real detachment does not mean artificially keeping oneself aloof or apart, right? So somebody can appear to be renounced temporarily. But if you put the object of their senses in front of them, then you can see if they're actually detached. If someone is like putting on a show of being detached and they're like fasting, you just bring them into your bakery and start baking some nice bread and desserts and see what happens, you know? And it's like the expression of it's fasting while sitting next to the fridge. Like it's a very high thing to be in touch with the objects of the senses and to be like, actually, yeah, but I don't want that. I want Krishna. So it's not enough to put up a front and be like, yeah, sense gratification's bad, you know? Yeah, I'm a very advanced brahmachari. I don't think of sex. And meanwhile, we don't know what's happening in their head. It's actually more powerful. One can see that if the objects of the senses are there, Prabhupada says, if one can remain unattracted even in the presence of such allurements, they are called detached. In the beginning, of course, a neophyte devotee must try to keep themselves apart from all kinds of alluring attachments. But the real position of a mature devotee is that even in the presence of all allurements, they are not at all attracted. That is the actual criterion of detachment. It's not like you're avoiding those things, or you're afraid of them, or you like villainize. You see, somebody who's falsely detached, they may practice brahmacharya, but what it manifests as is like a kind of misogyny, where they actually look down on the objects of the senses. If they're a man, they'll like abhor women because they're actually still attracted to them, and that scares them, right? One may have a toxic relationship with money. There's the expression, you may have heard, money is the root of all evil. It's actually not correct. The real expression is love of money is the root of all evil. In the falsely renounced state, we may think, oh, money is very bad. I don't look at it, I don't touch it. An advanced devotee is like, whatever money you want to give me, I'll use in Krishna's service. If I got no money, that's also no problem. Completely poor or completely rich, I don't mind. I got Krishna either way. But everyone else is always like trying to keep the money, or afraid of the money and afraid of like how it's going to pollute them. Does that make sense? There's a difference between falsely renounced or immaturely renounced and truly renounced. Truly renounced means you are not attached if you have it. You're not attached if you don't have it. You're not attached if you gain it. You're not attached if you lose it. And if it's there or not there, you're using your situation in Krishna's service. That's true renunciation. That's true detachment. And that's a wonderful thing. It's a powerful thing, because that means you can't actually be bought or sold. You can't actually lose your relationship to Krishna because you lose your money or your health or your hairline or anything, because you don't care about that. That's a very advanced thing. Viraktir, detachment.
There's a question in the chat.
Let's see.
If there's a comment or something.
Yes. Samantha says had to sign off. Haribol.
Okay.
Thank you, Samantha. Okay. That's 4 or 5.
That we're on number 6 now.
Number 6.
Very eager to serve the Lord faithfully.
Eagerness for achieving the desired success. Samutkanta. When one is sufficiently eager to achieve success, that eagerness is called samutkanta, means complete eagerness. Actually, this eagerness is the price for achieving success in Krishna consciousness. Everything has some value, and one has to pay the value before obtaining or possessing it. It is stated in the Vedic literature that to purchase the most valuable thing, Krishna consciousness, one has to develop intense eagerness. That's the price. That's what you have to pay. That's the only thing you have to pay. But you have to pay it. Tatra lolium api mulyam ekalam janma koti sukrita nalapyate. The actual verse Prabhupada is paraphrasing is intense greed for Krishna. That is the price, and the only price. And you cannot attain this pure bhakti for Krishna even with pious activities for thousands and thousands of births without such greed. You actually have to want Krishna. You got to want it. That was an old, I think, like selling point or catchphrase for Weight Watchers or whatever in the 1980s or 90s. Like, you got to want it. You got to want to meet your goal. But spiritually, it's actually true. You got to want Krishna. And at the advanced level, advanced devotees really are always like burning with desire for him. You know, at our level, at my level, sometimes I want Krishna. Sometimes I'm like, I'm good. I'm okay. Enough Krishna for today. You know, I'll just be honest. That's how I am sometimes because I'm not such an advanced devotee. And I look at that in myself and I'm like, yeah, that's room for improvement because I've seen advanced devotees. They're never done, which relates to like never wanting to have a spare moment. They're just like, they fill it up. They're always eager. This intense eagerness is very nicely expressed by Bhava-Bhakti Thakur in his book Krishna Karanamrita. Prabhupada quotes. He says, I am eagerly waiting to see that boy of Vrindavan, whose bodily beauty has captivated the whole universe, whose eyes are always bounded by black eyebrows and expanded like lotus petals, and who is always eagerly glancing over his devotees, and therefore moving slightly here and there. His eyes are always moist. His lips are colored like copper. And through those lips there comes a sound vibration which drives one madder than a mad elephant. I want so much to see him and Vrindavan. That's a poem that Bhava-Bhakti Thakur wrote of eagerness. Next symptom, Namagani Sadaruchi, attachment to chanting the holy names of the Lord. Advanced devotees are always chanting and always want to be chanting. And their deep connection to their practice of japa to kirtan is evident. This is another thing we can see. The advanced devotees, they chant their rounds. When they're done chanting their rounds, if they got any more time, they chant more rounds. If they're doing anything else and they don't need their tongue for something, they'll chant. They're always taking shelter of Krishna's names because the more one is advancing, the more one realizes he's there in the names. So why wouldn't you, you know? If we actually really experience Krishna deeply with every syllable of the Maha Mantra, why would we ever stop chanting? Right? Unless we have to talk about Krishna. That's also kirtan. You know, we wouldn't stop. So attachment to chanting is a very, very salient thing. It's a very relevant thing. It's a natural symptom of advancement. The next symptom is eagerness to describe the Lord's transcendental qualities. Guna Vyakyane. They're talking about Krishna, right? So in this Sangha, we sometimes we want to say something about Krishna, or we have a question or a comment or reflection, and that's good. In a Sangha of devotees who are very advanced, they're always talking about Krishna. They have to be pulled away. You know, they have to have a watch. Someone has to keep the time to let them know we got to go. You know, we got to do the next thing. Got to go to bed. Got to eat, because they'll just keep talking. They'll keep hearing and chanting. Attraction for living in a place where Krishna has his pastimes. Deep attraction for the holy dhams. This is also manifested for advanced devotees. They want to reside in Vrindavan. If they're not there, they're always there in their mind, or in Mayapur. Prabhupada writes, at these sacred places, Krishna displayed his childhood activities. Actually, if someone goes to Vrindavan, they will immediately feel separation from Krishna, who performed such nice activities when he was present there. Such attraction for remembering Krishna's activities is known as attachment for Krishna. So the rest of the chapter talks about how one can have some degree of this. Shadow reflection can be there, as we talked about, but how this real attachment at the highest level is only there for one practicing pure devotional service, without any motive for material gain, without any motive to just be free from material suffering or merge in the Lord's body or leave the material world. And how such attachment for pure devotional service, the desire to practice pure devotional service, comes about by devotional sangha. This association is where we get a taste for that. And Prabhupada also writes that just like attachment for Krishna arises by association, losing that attachment can happen by improper association. In other words, by offenses. If we cause offenses to devotees, we can temporarily lose some attachment for Krishna. Actually, bhakti is an eternal thing, so it's not exactly lost or gained, but it can be put on hold. It can be put on timeout. If just like in a kindergarten, you're on timeout if you're causing trouble. So the devotees of Krishna are very dear to the Lord, and so if one is vicious in their dealings with them, one can be put in timeout and can temporarily lose some spiritual credit, because Krishna doesn't like that. So being grateful for devotional sangha is, and embracing devotional sangha and taking advantage of it when it's there and hankering for it more and more is extremely wise. It's a wellspring for all advancement. And Prabhupada concludes the chapter by talking about how if somebody has unflinching faith and devotion to the Lord, even if they temporarily, accidentally are deviated from pure devotional service, you shouldn't judge them. Just like the moon, the full moon is so beautiful. It's actually compared to, so many things are compared to the full moon as like a standard of beauty. If you look closely at the moon, there's like little marks on it, right? It's not exactly perfectly white. There's like little spots, little craters or whatever, but we don't mind. The moon is still considered such a high standard. So similarly, if one is observing that a devotee is completely sold out to Krishna and is very steady in their service and dedicated to the practice of bhakti, if they sometimes temporarily display some something at a lower level, like some temporary attachment to material thing, accidentally they become somehow or other attracted to some material thing, they will come back to Krishna. We should have respect and regard for them, and not like dismiss, oh, this person, yeah, but like they talk about Krishna, but I saw them. They were watching, The Sopranos. They were watching The Simpsons. They were talking about celebrity culture. It's like we may have some material attachment. It may come up in the heart, but we should see that if one is attached to Krishna, the more attached they are, we should have more and more faith that any temporary manifestation of material, attachment is just coming and going. Prabhupada writes, similarly, a little fault in the midst of volumes of devotional service is not at all to be counted as a fault. Attachment for Krishna is transcendental bliss. Amid unlimited volumes of transcendental bliss, a spot of some material defect cannot act in any way, as long as one is sincere. Hare Krishna. Okay, let's take some comments, questions, or reflections on anything we heard today. Yes.
When we're talking about like talking about knowing of Krishna, having loving affections or feelings of Krishna, because what feels clear to me is when like we receive more information, we learn something new, we kind of have these like aha moments as it kind of coming down, like ready to receive, what have you. But when we have a feeling for Krishna, is it both? Is it like something that's like coming from within us, or is that feeling also like something that's gifted to us?
How would you differentiate? Help me understand how I can tell the difference between those two things you're mentioning.
I mean, I guess it kind of feels like they both kind of come down, but it's also because it's like stoking something.
Like a feeling versus a
Inside.
knowing.
I guess, or it's like I don't have like unconditional love for Krishna,
Mm-hmm.
And I know like that will come as I practice and what have you, and they'll come like reawaken from inside because it's already there, even though I can't feel it. But sometimes it feels like when we receive certain information, whether it's like Shastra or you talk with a devotee, it can feel like information is coming like down, like you're being handed something. So when we have those feelings of love for Krishna awaken inside us, is that also sort of like something like
It's both.
that we're like being given?
It's both. Because at the perfectional stage, for example, I'll give you an example of material consciousness and spiritual consciousness. At the immature stage or somewhat mixed material consciousness, one may think, I would like to serve Krishna in this way, right? This is what I want. I want this. And spiritual consciousness is, I want to please Krishna. What does he want? Right? And when our relationship with Krishna becomes manifested, it's my understanding is that it manifests as both our idea and mercy coming. So both are possible in our devotional practice. Like you may, and then it can also vary. Like we may hear something and it's like kind of theoretical and intellectual, and you receive it, and then maybe later in your practice, later in your spiritual path, you actually have realization about that. Right? It's not theoretical anymore. You read Bhagavad Gita, there's a million things that are spoken about in Bhagavad Gita, and some percent of them you realize it, and then if you ask the person a year later, that percentage is higher, and then if you feel like you have that in you, that verse is inside you, that realization is inside you. So I don't find the distinction to be necessarily that clear cut or that important, like it's this or that. Ultimately, we are part and parcel of Krishna. Ultimately, we are able to experience spiritual truth within ourselves. And so that's true. And also, we're very small and we're receiving. And that's also true. So
it's a descending process.
it is a descending process. That never stops. Both things are true.
Okay. Okay.
Mel has her hand up.
Yep.
Or Siddhanta Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really beautiful. All the different aspects of this topic. So, as I'm listening to this and reading these chapters, it's been a few years since I've read these. I've been just reminded of this process as explained in the Madhurya Kandamini by Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, if you've read it recently or not, but
not recently, but I have.
Yeah, it really like starting with the Bhajana Kriya, right, which has some antecedents as well as far as developing faith, finding a guru, and then it goes into these different stages of Anartha Nivriti, and that's it's just like volumes and volumes. So much written about it, the different types of anarthas and these things. But when we get to the stage of Bhav is a really, really advanced stage. So advanced. First we have to go attain Ruchi, right? Ruchi is developing the taste. And then you go to a Shakti, which is like, just like it's total attachment to that taste. Total absorption.
Yeah, at Asakti, we feel like Krishna belongs to us.
Right.
Sense of ownership of him. Mamata, he's like he's my Lord.
Yeah. So none of this is even possible without first being in some inner ras, in some type of ras. In other words, whether it's Vatsalya ras, Sakya ras, Madhurya ras. So I know in this book, Rupa Goswami's not really delving into all of that, but I just thought it was worth mentioning that until we really establish a relationship with the Supreme in one of these rasas, without that relationship, it's not really possible to have the feelings that we're describing, the emotions, when you talk about a spiritual emotion as opposed to material emotion. What I understand, what I've realized, it's only possible when you're in a ras and you have that relationship, either as a gopi or as a sakya, in other words, really like deeply, deeply being absorbed in a ras. Then you start to have a true spiritual emotion. So, and then we talk about different types of, Sanchari Bhav, Sthayi Bhav, whether it's a flickering thing or something that's, you can have several different emotions at once. Anyway, these are all kind of technical things that I think are worth mentioning. Again, at this stage for most of us, I think it's just good to get some familiarization with maybe what is to come in our spiritual life. Just to, kind of throw that out there. But yeah, I would love to have some discussions, about the
Yeah, I think that
Dhamini, I don't know, again, this
we
venue
can
that
we
we're
can take
doing
that
here.
offline a little bit. So it's a little bit of a
Yeah.
longer discussion.
Yeah.
But I guess I hear what you're saying, and I would also kind of not counter, but add that it's true that without a relationship with Krishna in one of the rasas, there is no actual manifestation of, many of the descriptions we'll find later in the Nectar of Devotion.
Mm.
Same time, there is a way in which, Prabhupada is describing like our relationship with the holy name.
Right. Yeah.
That
Sure.
this is not a merely theoretical thing for us, persons who have not yet realized our particular what our particular relationship with Krishna is in the spiritual world. That the discussion of spiritual emotions is not practical or relevant, even for persons who are at the levels below Bhava, because Bhava is very high.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
I think
manifested in different ways.
the other thing that came up is in the previous question about, these feelings or this the knowledge, whatever, is it descending or is it innate? It's definitely, I agree that it's descending. It's coming down to us. And that's only possible through association with the pure devotee. And that is an absolute prerequisite to any, advancement in Krishna consciousness, obviously. We know that. That's why, we all aspire to take shelter of a pure devotee, of a guru. And through the guru's experience, that comes down to us through the disciplic succession. That's very, very important to emphasize to everyone, that without that attachment to the lotus feet of the guru, it's not really possible. We can't do it on our own.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions, reflections, comments?
I'll reflect quickly because I know we're kind of at time. I think it's kind of reflecting on our conversation last week and kind of just being like, you can't find Krishna in thinking, right? Like you're not going to find him by like just you've got to have surrender, you've got to have faith, and you've got to have devotional service to him. And so when we think about it in that lens and we think about how can we be more attracted to Krishna, what am I holding back from Krishna? How can I run to Krishna? What are the things that I can do? These 9 things are things that obviously, like, I don't know that in this lifetime I could even perfect or come close to doing just, a half of one of these. But it gives us this little guidebook to say, okay, here's these little 1% things that you can maybe look at one of these and say, okay, I'm going to do 1% better in this today. And so it's not such an esoteric concept of like, how do I become more attracted to Krishna? And how do I, how do I have this better sense of ownership of Krishna? Like, these are things that are concrete. I mean, I remember asking Srinivas probably about 2 years ago. I said, how can we, if we're really eager and we're really excited and we have this exuberance to serve Krishna, how do we make sure that it's not a detriment? Like we get over enthusiastic. And he's like, as long as it's directed to, service to Krishna, as long as that eagerness is to have this intense, like you mentioned, greed for him, then like that's how we turn that, material emotion or that idea of exuberance. That's how we make it spiritual. So I think each of these things kind of give us these, like we all have these anartas, we have these faults, we have these struggles, and he's kind of calling out what they all are and putting it in a positive light and saying like, here are little things that you can incorporate daily, and a little bit of one is going to give you a little bit of progress on the path.
Thank you. Any more reflections or comments? Anything that stood out? Okay. So for this week, I'd like for us to leave a comment in the WhatsApp about, you're looking at this list of the nine symptoms of bhava, which are there at the beginning of chapter 18. Right there at the beginning of the chapters, there's a list of 9, and then Prabhupada breaks them down in more detail. Pick one or more than one, and give an example of when you've seen somebody with more of this quality than you have, how you've seen it in an advanced devotee, right? Eagerness to serve the Lord all the time, attachment to chanting of Krishna's names, detachment from material attraction, freedom from pride, you know, always trying to use every second in Krishna's service. So think of the most advanced devotees you know, or if you've heard about Srila Prabhupada, and comment about one of these qualities that you see in that devotee. Or if you want, you can talk about how you'd like to develop one of these qualities. So discussion of the 9 qualities of bhava. All right. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srila Rupa Goswami ki jai, Nectar of Devotion ki jai. Vancha kalpatarupyascha kripasindhubhye vacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo namaha. Hare Krishna, everyone. Thanks a lot. Thanks for tuning in. See you on WhatsApp. See you on YouTube. Hare. See you tomorrow for Bhagavad Gita. Hare.
Hare Krishna.